Welcome to another edition of the RockFit Files. I'm Rocky Snyder. This week I've got Mike Swienton, host of the podcast, the Health Me podcast. And he's a traveling physical therapist located in San Jose. We're just going to jump right into the conversation. I hope you enjoy.
Right now, you don't have private practice. Is that correct? You're working out of your own clinic, or do you work out of somewhere else?
So I'm doing something interesting. So I'm working as a concierge physical therapist with Luna Physical Therapy. And so
What's that
basically,
about?
what I do is I do outpatient physical therapy, but I go to people's houses. So when people think of home care, they typically think of people who may be a little bit lower level, where they may be, walking with a walker, they're maybe ventilated or something like that along those lines. But Luna Physical Therapy has allowed me to basically take a clinic and bring it to people's homes. And so what they do is, if you rolled your ankle, you hurt your back, or, I've even had kids who've, they came back from post-op surgery, had a patella relocation, people had knee replacements. I do all of their rehab right in the home.
Wow, so that must have just exploded, obviously, with COVID, right?
Yeah. In the beginning, it was a little slow, of course. People are kind of skeptical of someone coming to the house, but, as things progress, things have gotten a lot better. And I've been pretty much full time and had a pretty heavy caseload since May of 2020. So it's been nice.
And what are we talking caseload wise? Like, how many patients do you see in one day?
So you build your own schedule. So you're not technically employed through Luna Physical Therapy. You're a 1099. So you can kind of like gauge how many patients you want to see. I've been very busy. I think last year I was averaging between, 8 to 10 patients a day. Now I've bumped it back a little bit now with the podcast, probably between like 6 to 9, 6 to 8. So I'm quite busy.
And how many days a week are we talking? 4, 5, 6?
5. Yeah, 5 pretty much. I was on a 4-day schedule at one point, but by the time I was doing that, so that way I had more time for one day to focus on content, but it kind of made it so that it was, the other days were so tiring. It made the last day more like a catch-up day, and I didn't like it. So I've been working 5 days a week.
And you run the gamut, the full spectrum of care then. So you're talking acute rehab to the further end of almost like return to play or return to sport?
Absolutely. Yeah. I've had a couple young athletes who I've helped return to sport. He had a patella relocation. It was a revision, but he had to get back to football, and I got him back and he was completely okay. I see knee replacements. I see, just about anything, like you said, acute care all the way up to post-surgery.
So in regards to this athlete that you saw, I'm just curious, was it due to blunt force trauma, or was it non-impact, non-contact?
He had an injury before that was contact related, and then it had broken off. And it was non-contact. So contact and then non-contact. And so I saw the revision from the previous surgery.
And are there a certain protocol that you need to follow or required to follow? Or do you have, say, a freedom or license in which to explore different types of approaches for rehab?
Early on, it's definitely more like there's the parameters of following what the surgeon wants. Every surgeon kind of wants certain things where like it's non-weight bearing. You got to make sure you're doing the right things. Later stages of rehab, and this goes for ACL or other things, you can kind of get a little creative. Everyone's rehab program isn't going to be exactly the same. And especially as you start getting towards more in like the end, like the very late end stages of rehab, you want to make sure it's tailored to the sport that they're doing, right? Like a tennis player is not going to have the same exact rehab program as a football player, because the physical load, the type of activity that they're doing are completely different. And so that once you get towards the end there, you can kind of get creative in figuring out like what they need and like building an exercise program and tailoring all of that towards them.
All right. So just to throw some wood on this fire here, sure, and start it burning a little bit. Yeah. And so you're relying upon the knowledge of the orthopedic surgeon or the sports med doctor to start you off on a path. The trouble I see with that is that when it comes to medical school, orthopedists and sports med alike, they have about 2 weeks of learning about biomechanics. So that presents, in my mind and in my knowledge and experience, a tremendous problem where they are very compartmentalized, where they are just looking at that patella, and they're not looking at how it relates to the action of the foot-ankle complex, the pelvis, or the upper structure and how it feeds mass and forces down upon it. Do you run into problems with this where a doctor says, here's what I want you to do, and you in reply, in a very kind way, say, you're a freaking idiot?
Well, I think there is, yes, I think yes and no, right? So I think there are times when, an orthopedic surgeon will give me some protocols in regards to like weight bearing tolerance, or so explaining that sometimes surgeons will give you restrictions like, okay, non-weight bearing for 6 weeks. Week 4, week 5, I'm like, I really want to load this leg. I want to get you back to movement, because loading bones is what you want to do, right? And that's how you recover. So I want to walk a very tight line. Yes, I think there are some like headaches in regards to like making sure that people are loading that leg and getting back to what they want to do. On the other hand, from orthopedic side, I understand how they want to make sure that they're doing due diligence, right? They want to make sure that that bone is going to be completely healed. They don't want to have a recurrence rate, because one of the things that they do see on the orthopedic side is that recurrence. And if that doesn't heal completely, if it happens again, it's going to get a lot worse, and it's going to make all the rehab and as well as the recovery time a lot harder. And so I guess I understand some of the hesitancy. Another thing too to think about is, when patients are non-weight bearing, there's other exercises that you can do to make sure that they're staying active. So if, let's just say it's an ankle reconstruction or something like that, they can still work out that other leg, right? They can still continue to do single leg squats on the other side, and perhaps just work out that other leg to make sure that they're doing the things that they need to do. So it is frustrating in short, to get some of these parameters. And I think as physical therapy continues to improve and become more of a well-respected space, I think that's going to become more into the idea of like physical therapy will be determining the weight bearing status. But for now, I think you have to make do with what you got and try to make them as active as possible. And then obviously, listen to the orthopedic surgeon for now.
Yeah, I'm not trying to come down hard on the surgeons necessarily. I think there's some brilliant technicians out there, brilliant surgeons themselves and medical professionals, but when they're not asking advice from the person who has been studying biomechanics and kinesiology and rehab, but simply dictating, here's what I need you to do, without any collaboration or communication, that's where we run into trouble. And it's interesting you bring up, we can always work on another area of the body. You don't have to load bear. I mean, that's kind of where Pilates methodology and Pilates-based training originated from, was working with war veterans that were hospital bound or bed bound. But then the other thing is that you work one side of the body, the brain sends signals to the opposite side to create stability. And so by working, say, the left shoulder, you're actually sending great information to that right shoulder, even if it can't be moving at that time. So where did you get your education? Where did you get your degree? Because you are a doctor of physical therapy.
Yeah, so I went to school, the University of Buffalo, and I did my part of my undergrad there, but I also did my undergrad at community college in New York.
So sadly, you're a Bills fan.
No, actually not. So, well, but secondarily, I'm actually sadly a Giants fan, because I'm from Central New York, which is even worse. But we do have 2 Super Bowls over the past couple of years, so
we won't talk about that right now.
We won't talk about that right now.
No.
Secondarily, when the Giants aren't doing well, I'm definitely a Bills fan. I've been to more than a few of their tailgates, and I can certainly say it's the best tailgate party you'll ever be to.
Yeah, being a Patriots fan, had I known you were a Giants fan, we wouldn't even have this conversation right now.
I know. I saw you're from New England. I was like, maybe I won't bring that up.
Oh, you're killing me. That's all right. It's all right. There's always a thorn in someone's paw, and the Giants seem to be in mine. But that's good. I'm glad you guys got a couple of Super Bowls out of it. Whatever.
Listen, you guys are looking pretty good right now.
We're not bad at all. So do you work with a lot of athletes? You mentioned you got a couple. Is that a direction you want to head, or is there a different type of niche within the physical therapy world that you are really enjoying, aside from obviously the home care you're doing right now?
Yeah, I really want to get back to my roots of being within the realm of sports. I came out to California to start doing some travel, just to kind of get out of where I was in Buffalo, and also student loans are a very real thing. So I think trying to help in that aspect was something that I wanted to focus on over a year. Once the pandemic hit, it kind of sidetracked me in trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I just needed to land a job at that point. And that's where I found Luna. And Luna's been great and has been a career builder. And it's definitely given me a lot of confidence in the skills that I've developed. But for now, I really want to head into sports, and I've been working with a few athletes here and there. With Luna, I've been trying to tell more people and let other clinicians know in the area that I do home sports physical therapy. The only difficulty was that is a lot of the surgeons, or at least people who have see sports rehab, they usually want like them to go to a certain clinic. And so, but back to your question, I'm definitely trying to get into more of the sports physical therapy realm.
And you became a certified strength conditioning specialist through the NSCA as well. So you kind of are, you in your own right have bridged that gap between physical therapy and strength conditioning. So that's really quite neat because typically now we're finding, of course, more physical therapists becoming strength conditioning specialists to do just what you're doing. Is there any particular sport that you favor more than another?
I think I'm really good at breaking down football and soccer. I've played both sports, and I definitely understand the mechanics of the game very, very well. I'm not good at basketball, so I don't think basketball is ever going to be a realm I'm going to be able to kind of relate to. But I think in regards to understanding how players move and the physical demands of the sport, football and soccer are definitely my two.
Sounds like you've had some experience with that. Were you a high school like strength coach at one point in time?
I worked with a lot of high school athletes. So when I was in Buffalo, in undergrad and grad school, I was also a personal trainer and a strength coach for a local gym. And I would work with a lot of people trying to achieve their goals and trying to get them back to whatever they were doing or continue to build off the program they were already doing.
Nice. Hey, you mentioned you were an independent contractor with Luma. So that kind of puts you in I won't say an isolated area, but it could very well be isolated. Do you have colleagues within Luma or in the physical therapy world that you're constantly collaborating with or just dialoguing with?
I've tried. I've definitely been trying to work more and talk to more of Luna's physical therapists that work on the program, on the platform rather. But I am definitely more independent in that regard. And I'm right now in the process of trying to reach out to other high school programs, because I also have my emergency medical responder course completed, which allows you to see players on the field and manage acute injuries until EMS arrives and things like that. And so I definitely want to start getting into that realm where I'm actually on the field seeing athletes and managing acute injuries from the time they're injured until the time they're returning to sport.
And are you certified as an athletic trainer as well?
I am not, no. So that's the reason why I got my emergency medical responder certificate. And so I can manage acute injuries on the field.
That's great. And with the high schools nearby, you've got a whole bunch to choose from in Silicon Valley. Do you have any that you're volunteering with or working with right now?
I'm working to get in hopefully with Menlo Atherton. And then there's a couple other in the San Jose area that I've been eyeballing to try and reach out to try and work with.
Very cool. Yeah, that's very cool. So with your pursuit of more knowledge, after people get their degrees, of course, there's a little bit of maybe a respite where you can take a breath because you're not a student anymore and you can really start to focus on your career path and so on. But after a little while, I think that there is that kind of that desire, appetite for more knowledge. Are you pursuing anything right now in terms of more information and what direction does that take?
Yeah, right now I'm taking this class through, it's Coursera, but it's the Google Data Analyst class. And the reason why I'm taking that is data is going to be a huge driver in the things that we do with physical therapy, as well as strength and conditioning and everything else in the world that we live in, right? And especially as the world continues to evolve towards like wearables and things of that nature, like being able to analyze data and interpret that and make it valuable to patients is going to be extremely crucial. And so I've tried my best to try to educate myself in the realm of data analysis and integration within my practice, so that way patients improve their outcomes, but also can learn more from what they're actually doing.
Yeah, I think there's probably going to be a future course also, maybe labeled paralysis through analysis, where there's so much data out there that how do you sift through it and not lose sight with the basics of what you're trying to do? And this goes along with some of the other conversations in the past I've had with some athletic trainers and strength coaches and the like, performance directors in the major leagues and the pro sports world, where they're going, yeah, this stuff is good. It's going to give us some great information here, but we can't just rely solely on the analytics. So what kind of information with the Google Analytics that you're doing is there any kind of any barometer or bellwether that says, okay, this is how much data that you want to be analyzing, and here's when you know that you have a problem, that you've got too much information coming at you?
Yeah, I think it's like asking the right questions. You got to make sure, like, when you have a bunch of data, the first thing you want to think about is like, what questions am I trying to answer, right? Like, because if you have all this data and you don't know what questions you're asking, you're not really going to get an answer. Like, you have all this data and you're like, well, congratulations, now you have this conglomerate of information. And I've worked with some technologies, like it's called Dorsey V, where you put these small little wearable sensors basically on the knee and the sacrum, and they're all specific areas, and they give you all this like inclination angle during when they're moving and things like that. And so it's difficult to kind of navigate, but I'd say the best way to try to navigate at least all the data is try to ask the best question. And what are you trying to improve? It's like, are you trying to prevent injury? Are you trying to manage load? Are you trying to, the questions could go on and on, but it's more of just asking the right questions. I feel like that'll probably allow you to sift through the data more appropriately.
All right. You travel from one home to the other, and that means that you need to take tools with you. So as a traveling physical therapist, what's in your toolbox?
So I have a treatment table that I carry with me. I have a goniometer, and then I also have various resistance bands and other tools that I bring with me.
A goniometer, for the listening audience, is measuring joint angles. Mm-hmm. And so interested to know what a range of motion is on a particular joint. The goniometer is a little plastic device on a swivel that you can tell what the angle is and see if there's improvement, restriction, and whatnot. So simple tools basically is what you're saying. You don't have to have a whole bunch of equipment, because I imagine you're probably doing a little bit of manual work as well, or quite a bit of manual work with people.
A little bit of manuals. I really use what the home has. I mean, stairs, using books. You can really get very creative and make exercise extremely difficult for people who haven't been working out or in the early stages of rehab. I mean, the amount of creativity that I've kind of gotten into with exercise selection has been really, really fun. That's not to say that I don't use weights. I have patients who use weights, and even with, that one of the kids that I used to get back to football, I had to go over kind of a detailed plan with, like, when you go in the weight room, this is what you have to do. And, I have patients who have those adjustable dumbbells, and I definitely use what we have available to try and get you better. But, a lot of it, I do exercise programming is just, what you got in the home.
Mike, that's great, because it's often the case that you give too many things and people don't do what they're supposed to do. So what's your recipe for creating the compliant client?
I'd say making it as easy as humanly possible for them to exercise. So me going to home, it's really easy because I can be like, you can do that exercise right there. You can do that exercise right there. It's just limiting and taking away the barriers that make it difficult for exercise. If you can make it as simple and as easy to integrate in your daily life as possible, you're going to do it. And I found it very, I feel like a lot of therapists like try to go to the exercise sheet, and they think like the sheets are going to be the ultimate solution for people to do an exercise program. But I've given sheets to people all the time, and they take the sheets home or the folder, and they don't do anything. And it's because either they don't have a piece of equipment, or they don't associate their home with exercise. And so I think, again, with what I'm doing, it's really interesting. It's like I can associate their daily activities and all of their exercise program around what they do on a daily basis. And usually I feel that that leads to better compliance.
So you match up one of their daily tasks that they're almost just not even thinking about with a particular movement that you want to reinforce, such as, hey, every time you're about to go up to the second story of your house, when you climb those stairs, before you even begin, when you grab that railing, here's what I want you to do. And every time you climb the stairs, I want you to pause and give me 5 of those. Is that something about what you're talking about?
100%. That, and like the sink, a counter, a broom, a step, a stair, laying down in bed first thing in the morning when you get up from the day. If they're a frequent exerciser, we try to talk about like your warm up or your cool down. If they're like an avid cardio person, we got to talk about that. So I try to limit barriers, and I try to integrate whatever exercise program that I want them to do into the daily life that they're trying to complete. So that way they don't even have to think about it. And when they're at that point, right, when they're in that part of their day, I want me to be on their shoulder, be like, hey, you can do that exercise right now. I want to be that angel on their shoulder telling them like, you need to do this right now because it's going to benefit you.
Yeah, it's funny. The people that come to see me for chronic and acute pain and trying to get some solution with that, I might give them one thing to do, maybe two, and on the outside chance I've got somebody that's really into it, I might just give them 3 things to work on, but no more than that, because as soon as you start adding more to it, the compliance level just drops dramatically. And then it's overwhelming. So I guess put your approach on the hot seat here. How many exercises do you typically give somebody? Obviously, it'll vary from one person to the next, but what do you typically do?
2 to 3. I mean, I do the exact same thing you do. I think 2 is a great number, just because 1, usually I try to focus on just pain relief, and even if it's just something that like feels good or something that allow them to feel a little bit better, I try to do that. And then the second exercise is like returning back to some sort of activity. And I think 1 to 2 exercises is always a great option. And again, if you find somebody who's a little bit more motivated, 3 is always okay. But I think 1 to 2 is always good. And then when we get later, I try to balance between 6 to 8 exercises, especially as you get later, because I try to use a little bit of my exercises in the beginning as just obviously pain relief and then getting back to activity. But as you're returning to more strengthening protocols, the exercise list gets a little bit longer and longer, but you don't want to make it too long. So I try to balance between 6 to 8 exercises and no more than that. I try to not to go any farther, because again, like you said, the more exercises you get, the harder it becomes. So, and usually it's 6. I try to do a hard stop at 6 or 7 for PT exercises.
Yeah. Now, within the directions that physical therapists can take, of course, you're saying the sports med, sports PT direction that you want to go in, there's so many tools and elements that you can draw from, and educational paths. Like if there's going to be manual therapy, you might go with neurokinetic therapy, NKT or PDTR, or if you're looking at alignment, you might go with Posture Restoration Institute, PRI. Are there different avenues, or for that matter, the FMS, SFMA assessments? Are there different directions that you're interested in kind of exploring or investigating?
On the side of manuals, I think manual therapy definitely has its place in a lot of certain areas. I think for continuing education, I'm definitely looking more into some movement-based screens. You said FMS is always something is good. I think just trying to objectify the way people move, I think is something that as physical therapists, we need to continue to improve upon. Because again, every physical therapist is going to look at something a little bit different. And I think that hurts us as a profession, because if you go to see one physical therapist, you're not getting the same exact thing from another. So on the side of just continuing education, I think learning more movement system based education is going to be something that I'm going to continue to learn on and build upon. In regards to manuals, I think manuals always have their place and they're good information, good to know. But I guess in regards to like your question for like sports, I think movement systems is probably a little bit more time advantageous and probably better for what I want to do.
Right on. Okay, let's change directions here for a moment, because you yourself, you have a podcast.
Yes.
And you've been developing that podcast for a little bit now, and it's called the Health Me Podcast, correct?
Correct.
All right. And then, so what's your role with this podcast? What are you trying to do, and the types of people that you have on? What's your interest in developing this podcast?
So my goal with the podcast is to bridge the gap between patient and provider. One thing that I see a lot of physical therapists do, as well as medicine, is there's a huge discrepancy between what people really know about like medicine, health, and everything, and the provider. And so my goal is to try and provide easy to understand and concise information so people can make better health decisions long term. And
how do you do that?
Interviewing people in their space and trying to break it down so people can understand. So for instance, the most recent podcast I posted last week was about cryotherapy. The guy's name is Kyle Jones. He's the co-founder of iCryo. And basically we go over his company, which is this cryotherapy based pop-up shop that you can build this essentially. And they have over 250 plus locations. But throughout the episode, what I really try to highlight is like, what is cryotherapy? Why are people coming to see you? What is your experience when you go there? So that way, when people go to their clinic, obviously it's beneficial, but also in the process, they understand why cryotherapy is important. I've also had patients and people on there explaining some of their ailments. So 2 weeks ago I had Lena on, and we talked about her stages with cancer and battling stage 4 cancer. And we shared her story and some of the pitfalls that she had went through. And, you know, learning from patients, somebody who's going through stage 4 cancer, it can be very, very scary, and you may not know what to do. And so stories like that can perhaps help other people who are going through the same thing try to navigate, like, what should I do in this scenario? And so I think it's between patients and providers and hearing their stories and what they're doing, and me being the mediator between the two and trying to break it down as simple as possible. I think people will be able to make better health decisions.
Do you have insurance providers on as well, representatives from different companies to kind of help with that?
I haven't yet, and I'm definitely always open to talking to more people about that. I think in early stages of you know, a podcast, I think you may have noticed as well, just trying to get people on is always a little bit of a difficult task sometimes. So I've been trying to get people on who I think are interesting, and I continue to try and network with everybody that I meet. But I certainly want to continue to build that, and would love to have insurance providers and other people on.
No, it sounds like a great opportunity for the listening audience to find out how to navigate through a whole bunch of the troubles that they can often arise. I'm curious about the cryotherapy. I mean, I've tried it myself, and in my mind, here's what I think of cryotherapy. And you can tell me like what you think of it. I know you just had a guest on, so obviously you don't want to slam that guest in any way, but you know, we've got thermoreceptors that send faster signals to our brain and to the same sites that nociceptors or pain receptors will send. So in essence, you know, getting your body to be in some kind of fog of liquid nitrogen, or a fog of nitrogen, shall we say, that's going to send a whole bunch of signals up to my brain to block out the pain receptors, essentially. So I'm going to feel good when I get out of there. Plus, as I get out of that tank and walk around in room temperature, it's going to feel a hell of a lot warmer than where I was before. So my thermoreceptors are still firing up a storm, kind of buffering that pain receptors. And so that means I'm going to feel really good. I'm going to move my body. And it may be that just by moving my body is going to be a nice triggering factor to continue the suppression or inhibition of pain. And I guess that's my take on it. What's your take on cryotherapy?
I think cryotherapy is a great tool. I think it's another thing that we can continue to focus on. I don't think it's obviously a replacement for exercise. I think we all know that exercise is king here. I think cryotherapy on the set is obviously in the wheelhouse of recovery. One thing that I learned through that podcast was and I had talked to other physicians about this just to kind of make sure that this was something that was legitimate. And it's just like, he talked about what's called the vagal stimulation, which is basically you have this nerve in your body. It's the vagus nerve, it's a cranial nerve that goes from your brain and has many functions throughout the body. But one of the things is parasympathetic and sympathetic output. And he said, some people have an interesting response where, you know, you were describing when you get in there, you come out, you feel energized. But the way he described it was he kind of felt more groggy and kind of calm and not as energetic. And so everybody has a different response. My take on it is I think it's a great tool to add for recovery. I think, you know, in regards to evidence towards like perhaps anxiety and depression, things of that nature, I'm not 100% sure on it. It's not my wheelhouse, but I think as cryotherapy continues as more information comes out about it, I think it'll be a great tool to help with sleep regulation, also with recovery.
Yeah, sleep regulation. Do you work with your patients in regards to their sleep patterns?
I try to mention it in the initial evaluation. I always try to remind them that sleep has a huge impact on stress, your nervous system, things of that nature. So the way that they experience pain. So it's something that I include in the conversation. If a patient is kind of like, I don't really think about it, I don't talk about it anymore. If they ask more questions about it, I certainly try to get into it and try to talk about as much as I know about it. And if I don't know something, I say, I don't know. You know, these are the resources that I try to reference in regards to sleep and what I learned from it.
Yeah, I find that nutrition is obviously a critical tool when we're talking about health and recovery, whatnot. I mean, there's certain foods that are going to enhance inflammatory responses in the body, and others will suppress or reduce inflammation. So just out of curiosity, do you have any recommendations with your patients? Do you delve into it? I'm not expecting you to say yes, to be honest, because most physical therapists are very much movement-based. And only a few that I've spoken with actually delve into nutrition. What about yourself?
I do dive into nutrition. I try to stay within the guidelines of practice. You know, I don't make hard, fast rules, and I don't take their diet and go over everything like a nutritionist would. However, I do go over some basic stuff. So, and again, it's much like the sleep thing. If they don't talk about it, I'm not going to shove it down their throat and be like, you need to be looking at your nutrition. However, I do have some patients who with chronic pain and or, joint inflammation where I discuss, something that you need to do is perhaps just start a food log, figure out, what did you eat today? And do you notice that you have more pain? Is this something that is there something that you're noticing that continues to happen? Is there a pattern? Is there something associated with that? And, I try to not dive too much into it because this can be an hour conversation in and of itself, but I certainly try to make sure that I talk about nutrition when warranted and if inflammation continues to be an issue.
And do people bring this up to you these days? Now, are your patients going, okay, so what should I be eating to help in my recovery?
Yeah, I mean, we talk a little bit about it. I try not to go into the whole like what's good, what's bad idea, because I think, moderation is definitely key. And also, everybody, the individual approach to nutrition needs to be definitely considered. But, I try to go over a little bit with that and just discuss perhaps like foods that will be beneficial and also things that are good for your gut, whether it be like highly fermented foods or things of that nature.
All right, completely non sequitur. You came from upper state New York, which right now is it's a cold place to live.
Yes, it is.
And even if you were on the island, if you were in Manhattan or Long Island for that matter, this time of year is still cold. And now you're out in San Jose and you've been here for a year or two. What are your thoughts? Are you going to stick around here, or can you? Do you feel like your roots are calling you back to the winter of the Northeast?
Yeah, like we were talking before, I picked up a couple habits out here and I love the sun. I mean, I don't intend going back to the cold. I don't think I learned very quickly being in Buffalo and feeling the wind off the lake there. I think it's given me too many bad memories for me to go back and call New York home. I like California. I like the weather. I like the ability to do things, but perhaps the East Coast is something that may call me back to the Southeast Coast and maybe even Southern California, but definitely in the warmer environments is definitely where I'm going to find myself.
And do you have, aside from the podcast, any projects you're working on right now? I mean, that's an undertaking in itself. So I don't want to diminish what you're doing with the podcast by any stretch of the imagination, but if you're creative in that mind, it would make sense for you to be creative in other pursuits.
Yeah, I think I'm more of just focusing on the podcast right now. I think creating content and trying to figure out where you're going as a brand is something that I need to hone in on. So I've been really focusing on that. I've also been writing up a lot more scripts for YouTube and things that I'm preparing for this next year. So in that regard, I'm definitely starting to become more creative, and I'm trying to let my creative muscle be built a little bit more. And I'm writing more. And I'm trying to do more in the essence of like how do we get somebody who doesn't want to exercise to exercise? And answering that question is multifaceted and definitely can take a lot of time. And so I try to use that question to help guide some of my creative inspiration, so to speak.
Yeah, personally, I think using the word exercise is one of those things we should not do as just a starting point, because the connotation that people that do not exercise have with that word is not the most positive, uplifting thing, and it's not motivating. But if we could use words like experience, movement, or something along that line, that's just my own kind of personal opinion on that. Yeah, I try not to use the word exercise, to be honest, Mike, because it's unless it's in the right crowd. I guess you got to know your audience. So speaking of audience, though, if somebody wants to listen to the Health Me podcast, are you on YouTube as well as other platforms for podcasts?
Yes, I'm on YouTube at the Health Me Podcast, as well as I'm on Spotify and Apple Podcast, and it's just the Health Me Podcast. I'm also on Instagram. The YouTube channel or the Instagram channel is the Health Me Podcast as well, and I think there's a Facebook page as well. So I'm on all platforms, so to speak, except for TikTok, which that's coming next year.
Oh, no kidding! Little TikTok videos coming this way.
Yes, for sure.
Little snippets of physical therapy things that you could do at home.
I like I think physical therapy, the niche idea is good, but I think the idea of getting people and understand, like using what I know to try and navigate some of the things that I see on TikTok. Cause I'm just doing some market research, and some of the things I see about like a detox, or just things that the language around it is just not well, it seems like it's not well known. And so I'm hoping to provide a little bit of clarity of like what you really should be focusing on, and what to avoid and what things to do.
Very cool. All right. So how about just throwing out some of your handles here for Instagram, Facebook, YouTube? Where do people want to go?
Yeah. So in addition to the Health Me podcast everywhere, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, my Instagram's Swienton, Swienton with an underscore. That's my Instagram, and I plan on putting out more content. The YouTube channel will be up soon this upcoming year, and I plan on building out a bunch of content for that as well. So stay tuned for that. But just I'd say follow all the links for the Health Me podcast, and you'll be able to follow and listen to all of my content.
We'll make sure we put all the links down below in the description, as we always do. So just check out those, and then check out an episode or two or more of the Health Me podcast. Mike, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you coming on and chatting a little bit about what you've been doing, and at-home physical therapy, definitely in a growing industry, which is really nice to know, because there's a lot of people that are kind of hesitant to go where sick people are, aka the hospital. So thanks for being on.
For sure. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
And that's a wrap for another episode of the RockFit Files. Thanks, Mike Swienton, for coming on and sharing all about physical therapy and the Health Me podcast. Be sure to check out an episode or two. While you're at it, subscribe to this podcast if you haven't. Follow us on Instagram, and we'll see you next week.